How many of you are familiar with quantum computing at all? All right, for everybody else, first of all, you're not allowed to ask any questions whatsoever. For everybody else, we did publish what is probably the best-selling book in quantum computing right now, Quantum Computing for Babies. It starts with, this is a ball. It can be red or blue. So if you can get that, you might be able to get the basic understanding. This book is kind of the bane of my existence because there's a gentleman named Chris Ferry who writes wonderful science books for children, and we met, and it became kind of a joke that we would do this book. And I got a rum and Coke, and I told my wife, leave me alone for 2 or 3 hours. I got to knock out this kid's book. And 9 weeks later, I was on the phone with the editors again, and they were like, entanglement's such a long word, and we like to keep it to 3 to 4 words per page. And I was pulling my hair out. And all I could think about is what Einstein said about if you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it. And I realized at that moment, I did not understand anything about this topic that I just started my latest company in, and I had a long way to go. So we started this company. We did a keynote at South by Southwest in 2018 on this topic, and we were super excited. There's a lot of hype in this area. There's a lot of very excited people, and there's a lot of people now kind of marketing this stuff, and so it's very confusing for everyone involved to understand what is this technology, where is this technology in the development of its life cycle, and how will you be able to potentially take advantage of it? So for those of you who don't know quantum computing, one of the simplest ways to explain it is with a coin. So if you think of classical computing as a coin laying on a flat surface, on that plane, if it's heads up, it's a 1. If it's tails up, it's a 0. It can only be in one of those 2 states. Now, if you think of the difference between a bit and a qubit as, if you think of a quantum computer, take that same coin and I flip it in the air. And when I flip it in the air, while it's spinning, it's in a superposition of 1 and 0 and different various states in between. And so that's maybe a good way to potentially look at what is the difference. And where it becomes useful is when you have very complex calculations. So things that are computationally complex. And these computationally complex things usually look like a traveling salesman problem or other problems where you barely increase the number of inputs and the evaluation time of the problem goes up dramatically. So in the traveling salesman problem, you have somebody you're going to send to 14 cities and you want to figure out an optimized route, and you have a laptop and it takes it, a few seconds to do that, and you take it to 22 cities and that same computer takes thousands of years. And so there are a lot of problems in material science and geospatial information systems and astrophysics, all manner of things, pharma, banking, et cetera, that are problems that take computers. It's not that what we have can't do it, it's that it would just take it forever to do it. In some cases, hundreds of thousands or millions of years. And that's where we hope this technology will really come into use. So what I want to talk about are the 3 things I think we can do to advance this technology. Because as I said, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of competition, but we're not in the days of Intel versus AMD. We're in the days of like little mechanical gates versus vacuum tubes. It is still in its infancy, but it's going along at a very fast pace. So the first thing I want to talk about is investment, both of time and money and effort. Quantum computing is a trip to Mars to save the species, not a trip to Vegas for the weekend, okay? It takes a lot of resource to build these machines. It takes a lot of brain power. There are not millions of developers. If you look at the open source community from the Linux Foundation, 16 million developers. If you look at quantum computing software developers, maybe a couple hundred, right? So this is still in its infancy, and we need people that are prepared and organizations that are prepared to use the technology now, but realize that it may be a couple of years before they see the benefits of it. So why is everybody so excited about it? Well, if you look at this chart, you can see that in 1927, there was a 5th Solvay conference. And 55 years later, Feynman and Benioff came up with the idea of using a particle as a bit. Basically, think of it like a block sphere, and you could do different things to the spin of that and come out with some computational capabilities. Now, 6 years later, Los Alamos had 7 qubits, 6 years, 12 qubits. Fast forward to 2017. We went from 17 to 50 to 72 to 128 proposed by Rigetti to 160 stored qubits from IonQ. So this is exciting for everybody in the space, especially investors that want to make money off the face. The problem is that we have a quantum advantage that's not going to come out for a few years. So if you look at this, pessimists think it'll be 20 years, optimists think it'll be 3. We believe all of you should be preparing for this technology today. I personally believe that quantum computing will change computing more in the next 10 to 15 years than it has changed in its entire existence. And I don't think about problems or classical problems that we stuff into these machines. I think about like TI-99 4A, or one of the first personal computers, those old Radio Shack machines. I see people smiling, I know you know them. And you were like, this machine is kick ass at spreadsheets. And you weren't thinking about the internet or games or encryption or any of those things. And I think that's how we need to look at these machines, not to solve just some of the problems we have today, but to solve an entirely new world of problems no one has even dreamed of. So one of the big problems with this is investment in the space. Not investment by people like yourselves, but in the startup industry, you'll notice that most of these companies have institutional investors, strategic investors. So these are investments of very long term. And the reason is that the number of seed rounds in venture capital has been going down, and the size of those rounds has been going up. And what that does is it creates a dynamic in where it kind of chokes out some of the innovation out of the system. You end up in a situation where you have fewer startups doing very clustered sets of experiments, so they're not as widespread across the field, and that's not really a good thing for its development. For those of you who aren't familiar with venture capital, this is because most funds run on a 10-year life cycle. And so if you're 5 years into a 10-year fund, and somebody like Bo Ewald, who's going to speak about quantum hardware and sensors a little later today, and I come to you and we pitch you and we say, Bo and I have an amazing idea, and it's going to be quantum, and this is what it's going to do. These funds are governed by a thing called the European waterfall, meaning I just had $2 billion exits, but I don't get the money till everything exits. So I don't want to invest in the quantum thing because probably in the next 5 years, I'm not going to be able to do it. Now, China has addressed this problem by investing over $25 billion into this space. A lot of other countries are, and last year, Bo and I and some of our colleagues were able to work with an organization called the National Quantum Initiative to get $1.2 billion in authorization for funds for quantum computing. One of the issues with that is you guys understand that, but nobody outside of Bo in my world understands that authorizations is not appropriations. So there's not $1.2 billion out there to actually advance the technology. There's also a difference in value and valuation. You have companies that have been building up as startups for a long time, and these companies are working on some great quantum technologies, but in order for them to get enough money, they've kind of increased the sizes of the valuation. And this creates the potential for a quantum winter. If we go around and we promise to everybody in the room that these machines are going to cure cancer and solve all your geospatial information problems, et cetera, it's a little too early for that. It doesn't mean that they're not useful. It doesn't mean that they won't be one of the most impactful things on your industry in history. It's just where we're at in the life cycle. But again, this falls into that kind of life cycle, hype cycle that we're in right now with quantum. So you have to be really careful about what you read, what you look at incorporating. That's not to say that anybody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes. It's just to say that saying you have thousands of qubits if you're D-Wave, and you have maybe 50 if you're IBM, already creates a problem for people trying to make a decision, because they're like, well, IBM makes $100 billion a year, and they have 50, and this is a 16, 17-year-old startup, and they have thousands, and it's hard for you to determine. And that problem spirals when you actually try to apply this to anything. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is collaboration. I believe that this is the only way this technology will advance. I think that there's a lot of people competing in this space right now, and I think that those people are all competing over a piece of pie when they're standing in a kitchen where the ingredients are just spread all over the place, and there's no cook, and the oven doesn't have gas, and none of the water is hooked up yet, but we all are going to get that piece of pie. And so I think there should be not just collaboration between the startups, between the incumbent players, but between industry, right? We need to have a collaboration that says, hey, a pharma company has a molecular modeling problem, and this is how we could apply the technology, and we're going to have maybe a couple of startups team up with them to work with it. Maybe there's problems in your space, and we need 4 or 5 organizations from your side to team up with 3 or 4 organizations from mine. Collaboration is going to be super key. So to that effect, and to help people like yourselves get immersed in quantum, we've actually spent a lot of our time doing very non-startup things. So again, Bo's going to be speaking about some sensors closer to lunch. He worked with me, along with several other people, to create the IEEE Quantum Computing Standards Work Group, to create standards for nomenclature that you can go look up soon. That's PAR 7130, to where you understand that difference between, well, what's the difference between a 50-qubit circuit gate machine and a thousands of qubit annealer? We also set up a developer community. How many of you are familiar with Stack Overflow? So 5 software developers. No, I'm just kidding. If you go to quantumcomputing.stackexchange.com, we now have over 5,000 people in this community where you can ask questions about development, how could it be applied to GIS, et cetera, and you will probably get an answer 90% of the time is what we're averaging right now. So we have a pretty good hit rate. We also partnered with CERN to create a program in this area to send young master students, if you know any. We just opened up the call to CERN for 5 weeks during the summer to work with this and other physics technologies that will affect this space. And then, of course, we've been trying to work with the Linux Foundation to get some things going to create a little bit more open source in the area. The approach that we think you should take, and it is our approach, is simple. There are a lot of people working on the hardware right now, dozens of companies with some amazing physicists doing incredible work. They're not working on the process of discovery enough. There's not a lot of software startups. There's 80 startups in the space worldwide. There's about 10 that you hear the same names all of the time. Fortunately, Strangeworks is one of those. But there's not a lot. They're focused on algorithms. They're focused on applications. They're focused on some research, maybe some consulting with entities like yourself. We don't do any of that. We are a pure software play, and what our focus is on is that process of discovery, because you're not going to have a quantum computer replace a classical machine. They're going to work together, right? You're going to use them at a moment in time when you have the very computationally complex problem that you need to solve. And so we think there needs to be a lot more focus on the human aspect. And as I said, to that effect, we built over 5,000 people in this community. The URL's right there if you want to snap a picture or take it. And all of this process of discovery, a lot of questions about the toolkits, some hardware questions, we have everybody focusing on there. So we kicked it off. A lot of companies, IBM now points you to this community to answer questions on Qiskit. Microsoft has sent some questions over here. It's kind of becoming the gravity well, if you will, for where you can learn quantum, kind of get your head wrapped around it and kind of find out how you can apply it to your daily job. So one of the things that is missing again is these tools for discovery. This, a few of you raised your hand and said you're software developers. A lot of you aren't. How do you get started with this? If you're a geneticist, how do you get started with it? Maybe you're a physicist working in an energy field. How do you get somebody immersed in this? And what we decided to do was to build some free tools that you can use. And we have an awesome domain that's very easy to remember for you to go check those out called quantumcomputing.com. So it's super simple, right? But if you go to quantumcomputing.com, you can register today for our beta. And if you put, something in your profile that you were at GIS, then we'll let you in. And it'll help you take all of the toolkits and put them together. In addition to that, it'll help you with sharing knowledge. We have some library experiments in there. We're building out a bigger set of libraries. So if you're wanting to play with Schwar's algorithm, you don't have to go and find that code somewhere or learn how to write it or whatever. You can come in, see what the protocol is, see what the quantum code looks like and how it works with some explanation, and then take the code and just like GitHub, fork it into your own project, into an editor that's built in here, where you can play around with that code and see how you might be able to play it and again, get your head wrapped around this technology. This platform is going to remain free because I think it is incredibly important for people to have access to the technology, for it to be democratized across your population. and for you to have a resource that is community-based, because it takes a team of people to execute on this. You need some physics and some math, maybe some discrete math. You need a software developer or two. I'm not going to go write the next great quantum application, and neither are you, but several of you working together probably are. And so we're very interested in supporting that. The foundation is easy. For those of you who haven't done any programming in this area, there's basically 5 toolkits that you can use. There's IBM's Qiskit, Microsoft's Q#, Forest from Rigetti, Cirq from Google, and of course D-Wave's new Leap. And D-Wave is actually given a little bit of machine time away. I think it's like a minute or something if you sign up. And then also IBM has machines online and you can use those. You can run some of the Cirq and the IBM simulators and other things, and Forest as well, and Rigetti makes their own hardware that you can access online if you work with them and get an API key. And then Microsoft doesn't have any hardware available. They do have a really great simulator, and many of you may be familiar with C#, Q#, and C# work together for you to be able to start building out some programming repertoire. So these are the kind of platforms you have a choice of in this area. What you can do with quantum computing in these platforms is still very, very simple. The way I look at it is we don't have quantum computers just yet. We have really, really extremely fascinating lab equipment for exploring the quantum universe, but I wouldn't quite call them computers just yet. Maybe still a couple of years. And if you think about it, your phone in your pocket has 3 billion transistors, and we're talking about these machines having 50 qubits, maybe they get to 100 qubits. Well, when you think about that, even if those qubits are worth millions of bits, we still have a ways to go. But this is where I want your attention focused, because if I had a 10 million qubit machine and I dropped it in the middle of San Francisco or Langley or Tokyo or wherever, there probably wouldn't be anybody who could develop it. You can't take a software developer in your organization and make them a quantum computing developer. It is different than AI, where you could go download some Python toolkits or download some information, and all of a sudden, you can start kind of get some machine learning going. This takes, much like in the early days of computing, specific knowledge. In the early days of computing, you had to be an electrical engineer to understand the flow of electricity between the gates in order to program a computer. To program a quantum computer, you need to be a physicist or have an extremely deep knowledge of physics. We have 2 on our staff that save me every day when we're working with this. Again, hardware, software, technology, services, these things are all being focused on. And they're being focused on by a ton of companies. Not enough people, especially in organizations like yours, and I cannot emphasize this enough, are looking at quantum, figuring out who in their organization might be able to work with this, or where they need to hire to augment their organization, and focusing on this process of discovery. And the reason I think this is so important is because of unlikely discoveries. If you think about the Wright brothers, who have been given credit for flight, they didn't invent flight, and hundreds of people around the world were working on flying. But they did invent the 3-axis gimbal that made it available. You wouldn't crash. You could actually made flight, something that you could produce, et cetera, et cetera. That is where the value in quantum computing is going to come from. Early in the days, I don't believe it'll come from one of your organizations. I believe it'll come from multiple organizations working together and getting some unlikely discoveries that feed into a cycle of development. I think this is ridiculously important. So our joke is 2 guys in Silicon Valley aren't going to make quantum computing real, but we have like 10 guys in a really big garage in Austin, and we invite all of you to come by. Again, we're very transparent. The address, the phone number, the email, you can take all of those down, and if you're interested in this technology and you want to come by the office and visit, if you want to try to collaborate on projects, if you have other people you'd like us to try to collaborate with, we are extremely focused on trying to be a spanning layer, if you will, across this quantum industry and getting more and more people to work together in new and different ways that will help advance this technology. Because the reason it's important is this technology is not going to be like the development of computing. This technology is going to get to 200 or 300 qubits, and then you'll start solving some of the problems with material science, and then it'll get to a few thousand qubits, and you'll start solving perhaps some of the noise issues. You'll start being able to ramp it up faster. So whereas computing started and advanced gradually over a long period of time, quantum computing at some unidentified date in the future is going to start, and the ramp is going to be much, much steeper. And so if you're not preparing for this today, it is my personal belief that you will be caught underneath it 3 to 5 years from now. So I think it's incredibly important that you understand that. The last thing quantum needs is it needs to be a little crazier, a lot more creative, and a lot more patient. We are right now in this industry focused too much on the way we do things classically. One of my friends at IBM says, you're thinking too classically, but we're still trying to say, oh, this is just like a faster processor or a different type. But much like you had a CPU and then you have a TensorFlow, for those of you who are in the machine learning, like a TPU, you're going to have a CPU and a QPU. And so we need to get people thinking not so classically and thinking much more about these potential areas that nobody's thought about. What are the processing problems nobody's even thought about? Because when you get to them, you think, well, we just can't do that on the infrastructure. What are the processing challenges? What are the information challenges that are so big, so vast, it requires so much computational power, and how can we start using these machines to apply them to that? So the way I like to think about it is this. It used to take 6 months to go from one side of the United States to the other. And then we got a train, and it took a week. Okay? But no matter how great that is, eventually you reach an ocean. And so air travel solved that problem. And so if you think of computers we use today, eventually we reach a super complex, computationally complex problem. And now we need quantum computers to kind of be the air travel of computing. That is to say that planes didn't get rid of trains anywhere in the world. Trains aren't something we look back historically and say, oh, we used to have trains. We use them all over Europe. We use them here. If you're in the DC area, you probably use Amtrak all the time. But we have planes that augment that situation and where the train just doesn't have that capability. And so that's how I'd like you to think about this. Think about your classical computers, your processing infrastructure, and then adding this augmentation of quantum computing to it to where you're able to use those together to solve some really complex problems in your workflows. So what does the future look like with quantum? It's definitely going to revolutionize science. It's going to revolutionize science. There's cures for diseases that will probably be discovered, custom drug discovery. Obviously, things like climate change or weather will be affected. And it can really be used to improve the human condition around the world. But for you, there are probably dozens of problems that you face that this technology might be able to be applied to. And when I say might be able to be applied to, it's for no other reason than we don't know. There's no killer app for quantum right now, but there will be. There's no example I could give you of, that's going to be really relevant. Maybe there's some papers on the archive or something, but these machines are just now coming into a production state, and they're just now coming into their own, and they are going to change things just in an unbelievable fashion. And we're going to be around the whole conference. So if you want to ask us questions after, or you want to talk to one of my physicists who's here with me, we'd be happy to sit and talk to you about this. We'll even show you some software and help get you started. But it's really, really important to understand, I've said this 4 or 5 times, but nobody is paying attention. This is the thing you need to be watching out for. We don't have AI, and it's interesting, the machine learning stuff, but in 1971, Martin Minsky said, in 3 to 8 years, we're going to have a computer that has the intelligence of an average human being. And it is 2019, and you don't have that. We have really good automation, okay? And that's great, and it's super useful, and you should not pay attention to it. But all of that fear and uncertainty and doubt about AI and the implications and what it would do and everything, all of those things about this crazy future it would create, those are all true with quantum computing. This is going to be one of the biggest jump forwards in compute power that we have ever seen. It is a national security issue already for countries all over the globe, including the United States. It is a competitive concern for all of the people in pharma and banking and energy, aerospace. This is a really big deal that you have probably not been paying enough attention to. So we owe it to humanity to make sure this technology is developed appropriately, that it is available to everybody, and I'd like to join all of you in doing this. So please go visit quantumcomputing.com, sign up, send it to your developers, send it to your software people in your organization, and we can all start working towards this path. Now, before I thank you for your time, I've left exactly 5 minutes and about 5 seconds for Q&A, because I understand that we wanted to do that. And hopefully that'll, if you didn't get any value out of my talk, maybe you have a question I can answer that'll help get you some value. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is great.
Is that good?
Yeah, we got some time.
And if you ask a question and you come see me afterwards, I will give you a free copy of the book.
Oh,
which is also $7, so it's not like a really, I think that fits the whole gifting thing.
Yeah, that sounds safe. Well, let's start off with a question. So a lot of this audience here are, national security professionals supporting, the security of our nation. And I think if you could just spend just a little bit of time talking about what are some of the national security implications of quantum computing. Is it just that they're going to break our encryption, or is there other bigger things?
That's a great question, and I never talk about it in my talk because it is the first question that gets asked every time. Will quantum computing break encryption? What threat is this from a national security perspective? And at, depending on whose calculations you use, maybe around 4,000 qubits, if they're topological qubits, maybe it's 1 million or whatever, yes, you will be able to use something like Shor's algorithm, and you will be able to factor really large numbers really fast. And so there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt about that. But I want you to take a moment to think about all of encryption through all of history. Because there used to be this machine called the Enigma machine, but nobody uses that anymore, right? And then we had RSA keys that weren't 256. Nobody uses those anymore. So from a national security perspective, information that was stored or encrypted in some older format, that'll be the stuff that'll fall first. And while your big adversaries on the global landscape might not be interested in that, there are 100+ countries that don't have those technologies that might be. So securing older information, I think, is super important. But I also think having a realistic view of the implication of this technology. So even if I could factor a number, and I could do it in a couple days, and I could break his encryption key, then I have to repeat that entire process to break hers. And then the time that you're finding this out, you can maybe take that key, and let's say that I have that 4,000 qubit computer, you double the length of that key, and now maybe I need 6,000 bits, and maybe the material science problems alone take me another 1.5 years to do that. I mean, we don't know. You need to be thinking about this, but you don't need to be scared about it, because security is very simple, right? Security is about 2 things, time and resource. Because with enough time and enough resource, I can get into anything that you have, I promise you. And so we try to extend that time out to thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. So there's no reason to fear quantum computing, and there's actually reasons to embrace it. Things like quantum encrypted networks, right? Things like post-quantum encryption, techniques. So there's a lot of good that it will bring to it as well. So I wouldn't focus on the fear and uncertainty, a doubt of encryption. I would focus on the opportunities to build completely new encrypted systems. And I would worry about maybe some of the ways we used to do stuff if you got older information, and less secure means, and making sure those are brought up to date, because there's a lot of information in the world that's not.
Great, yeah, thanks. Another question that came in from a couple people was really around this area of having to be this expert, this physicist to work in quantum computing. So are universities preparing this kind of future workforce for quantum computing? Are there specific universities that have programs around it, or that are really building out people we can tap into?
That is just starting to happen. Obviously, in Waterloo in Canada, there's been a lot of programs. There's been programs at different universities all over the world. But now you're starting to see those spread. So MIT has some things you can do. Obviously, Stanford, A&M and UT here in Texas both have programs that they're starting. I think that, we did a test program with UT, and I sent one of my old buddies who was an Apple R&D superstar developer, and about a week in, he was like, yeah, I'm not gonna make it. Because there is, a little bit of physics cliff, but that's not a reason to not get into it. There are gonna be layers of abstraction. If you think about how we used to program computers and how we program them today, remember, you used to have to be an electrical engineer. because you had to understand the flow of electricity between the gates. And now if you go to any WeWork in the world, there are organizations teaching developers who don't even understand computers have gates. So all of that will change over time, but there's a lot of university programs already going, and there's some starting. Overseas, Delft University has probably one of the best programs, which is quantum information for developers. That's a really good one, and Waterloo is good as well, probably, if you want to go and explore what some of those programs look like.
All right, great. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Let's give them another round of applause for
Thank you very
Hurley.
much.
Thank you so much.